I'll be buried in my grave before I become a slave, yeah. That is what I heard them say way back in the day. I'll be buried in my grave before I become a slave, yeah, yeah. But it seems like since that day, yeah, we have sorely changed. I'll be buried in my grave before I become a slave, yeah, yeah. That is what I heard them say, way back in the day. I'll be buried in my grave before I become a slave, yeah, yeah. But it seems like since that day, yeah, we have sorely changed. Whoa. Hey, hey. Whoa, oh, 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 whoa, oh, 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 oh.
And now, live from beautiful Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, you're watching My Fellow Americans with your host, Spike Cohen.
Yes! Yes! Yes, it's me! It's me! Keep clapping! Clap to fight against the dark psychic force of collectivized hatred. How will we know you were against the dark psychic force of collectivized hatred if you didn't keep clapping? Welcome to My Fellow Americans. I am literally Spike Cohen. I am so happy to be here with you tonight, and I'm extremely happy to be live with you on YouTube. They tried to take us down. They tried to take down our ability to live stream, but we fought them and won. We don't know how. We're not sure how we won, but we did win. And now we're coming to you live on YouTube. Google 0, Muddied Waters Media 1. I wield tremendous power in these hands. This is a Muddied Waters Media production. Check us out on Facebook, on YouTube, on Instagram, on Anchor, on Twitter, Periscope, iTunes, Google Play, anywhere on the internet that you would expect to see something like this. We will almost assuredly be there. Check us out everywhere. Like us, follow us, hit us with 5-star reviews. If there's a bell to hit on YouTube, there's a bell. Hit bells. If there's any bell, hit the bell if applicable. And be sure to share this right now. The last thing I want is for you, any of your closest loved ones, to miss a roughly hour-long libertarian anarchist podcast on a Wednesday evening. So be sure to share this. Give the gift of Spike Cohen today. Kids love it. This program is brought to you by Anchor FM. I will be plugging that later, roughly halfway through this program, probably at a very inappropriate moment. The intro and outro music to this and every episode of My Fellow Americans is from the amazing and talented Mr. Joe Davi. That's Jodavi. Check him out on Facebook, on SoundCloud. Go to jodavimusic.bandcamp.com. Buy his entire discography. It's like $15. You'll be so happy. I'd like to thank Kroger for this delicious purified drinking water that I drink on this in most episodes. Not all episodes, but most episodes of My Fellow Americans. Bulavanaka. Shout out to Tehran Turks' mom and him. Guys, my guest tonight is an absolutely amazing human being. She has been very active in the liberty movement, a libertarian household name, if you will. If you can picture a libertarian household, she would be a name in it. For 15 years now, she is currently running for the Libertarian Party nomination to be the next president of the United States. Her platform is absolutely remarkable. I am so excited to have her on. Without further ado, my fellow Americans, please join me in welcoming to the show Madam Future President Kim Ruff. Kim, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much for having me on.
I'm really
Sorry,
excited.
I've been laughing in the background during your intro.
No, I know. I was trying to keep it straight while I was hearing you like laughing the whole time. So I appreciate that. But I'm not going to say that I'm jealous that you were on Matt's show, The Writer's Block, first before mine. I am going to say that as soon as you guys signed off, I was in your DMs requesting that you be on my show, and also that I cried a little. So
In my DMs, actually, which is
I
the
know
first.
that's what. Yeah, it was like crying emojis. Would you like to be on my show? And you're like, sure.
Oh, he seems pathetic. Okay.
I guess so. So thank you for buying my desperate person shtick. It worked for my wife too, so it's been a good thing. I've had a good run with it, so thank you. And guys, be sure to comment with your thoughts and questions, and Kim and I will tell you if you are right or wrong. Now, Kim, this is your first time on the show, and whenever I have a guest on for the first time, the first question I always ask is, what brought you to libertarianism? Would you say it was kind of an aha moment or a gradual evolution? Tell us about that.
I think in my case, it was more of a gradual evolution. It was
Okay.
a conflation of factors. I was raised Republican. We live in Arizona, and so that's very much a Barry Goldwater Republican state.
Right.
And so I kind of came from that bent, very much of the free market mindset. And then after 9/11 and just watching the excuses used to increase the amount of power vested in the federal government, warrantless wiretapping with the USA Patriot Act, suspension
Right.
of habeas corpus for declared terrorists, and then, of course, invasions in Iraq and Afghanistan, that turned me off from the GOP. The additional factor that had a huge impact on me is GLBT rights. One of the gigs that I had for about a decade was I wrote movie reviews for a local gay magazine, an entertainment magazine.
Okay.
So a lot of my friends are in the community, and having seen just the institution of social programs to penalize homosexuals, it really, that was another thing that really turned me off in the GOP. But I was never a Democrat. That was never something that I leaned toward. I'm not a proponent at all of using government to do really anything for that matter. So the natural response was to look at the Libertarian Party. A friend of mine who knew about it suggested it. I read the platform. I loved everything they had to say. It was like the first time in my life where I felt this was reflective of my personal views that I'd acquired over the course of my life. And so I immediately changed voter registration in about 2005, and I got involved in the party in 2009 after I graduated from college.
Very cool. And so you aren't one of these libertarians who are like, well, not a big fan of this part of the platform, but I really support 80% of it or whatever. You're kind of like, you look at that and you're like, yes, this is what I believe.
Yeah, I really love our platform. And what I particularly like about our platform is the statement of principles, because I think it's just such a beautifully encapsulated summary of everything that we stand for as libertarians. The recognition that it is totally unethical and immoral to use force to enact your will. So that's something that we vehemently reject. And the natural response to that is to reject government, because government has a monopoly on force, or at least the state version of it has a monopoly on force, whereas you can have a voluntary government, but that's a separate discussion for another time, unless you want to get into those. But yeah, then the platform itself is just an expansion on how those ideas translate to various different aspects of policy or programs. And it's really very well done. And I don't have any objection or issue to it at all. In fact, I love the fact that we just added another plank to it where we talked about sex work now.
Yeah,
finally.
the sex work
It's something
plank,
that we've been talking about for a very long time. I'm glad that now our national platform has a plank specifically talking about how that is totally acceptable. We don't have any issue with it, and there's no reason for government to penalize people for engaging in that.
Right. And I mean, to be fair, obviously the platform before that, the logical conclusion of that was that sex work was not something to be legislated or controlled by a controlling state. This just puts it out in no uncertain terms that, this is something that we support. Now, what led you? So you've been doing this for about 15 years now, which in libertarian years is like 60 years. It's a long time to be. It's a long time to be a libertarian. What would you say led you to decide to run for president?
Okay. Well, just to clarify, it's actually been 10 years. I started getting involved directly in 2009. I mean, if you want to count the time that I changed my political registration, 15. But as far as activism goes, 10. The reason why I decided to run for president, having come from being kind of an intra-party politics person, working in that capacity, holding positions of authority or working in committees and doing stuff of that nature with the party directly, was the recognition that we need to have somebody on the national stage who's able to articulate these values and do so without error and without creating a situation where our activists or down ballot candidates are effectively correcting misapprehensions voters might hold about what we believe. That's something that we've struggled with because historically we've deferred to the concept of name recognition or the potential of getting a certain amount of votes or, a vote threshold or acquiring a war chest, supposedly this amazing pot of gold that's going to come our way if we ran this this person. But this person will, when they do get media attention, they will neglect to really hit home some of the things that make us so distinctly unique and wonderful compared to the two major parties. So since I've been doing this on a local level, going and doing petition drives or voter registration drives, just tabling, and where you have that conversation all the time and you have to answer these questions all the time. We know this backwards and forwards. Who's better to represent our party than our amazing activists? So when I threw my hat in the ring, it was sort of a call to arms for everyone. Not so much like it needs to be me. It doesn't have to be me, but we all have that capability of being that awesome representative. And we should step up. We should stop saying someone should come save us and instead take control of it and do it ourselves.
We need a very famous, a person with some level of name recognition in the double digits who we have to teach how to be a libertarian while they run for president as a libertarian.
What's Jesus doing? Can we get him on the horn?
I'm pretty sure Jesus would know libertarianism. I just feel like innately he would know. We wouldn't have to walk him through it. But yes, it's that same. We're looking for the former Republican Jesus that's going to walk us to the holy land of 5%. Anyway, I that whole thing is anyway.
And
so
he parteth the Red Seas.
5%. Not win. Just get 5%. Doesn't matter if he's a libertarian or not. We just need 5%. That's literally what we care about. So it's January 2021, right? Yeah, it's January 2021. You have been. This show's not even happening anymore. You have been inaugurated president. What do the first 100 days of the Ruff Phillips administration look like?
Well, to give a little hat tip to my friend and one of our campaign members, Craig Bowden, he wanted me to make sure that I was explicit in saying that the first 3 or 4 days will be spent dealing with parties and calling dignitaries and foreign heads of state and saying, hey, thanks, and how's it going? So he wanted to make sure that I was clear about that. There's going to be some administrative stuff first.
Right.
But as far as the first 100 days, the big things that we are really trying to hit home is that we're vehemently, passionately anti-war. We need to end those full stop, and we need to remove our troops, bring them back home. We need to close overseas bases. We need to stop being the aggressor on the international stage. An addendum to that, and we actually covered this in an interview last night because John and I did that together, is the issue of tariffs, which is, dovetails into the whole thing with the free market. We want to have a free market, both domestically and internationally. And the best way to foster healthy international relations is to show respect, diplomacy, and of course, engage in a free market situation. When we deny a free market opportunity, we are denying ourselves a wealth of information, products, and services that are going to make us as individuals in a society better. We're effectively stymieing our growth, not just economically, but intellectually as well.
Right.
So it's important that we do get rid of tariffs and that we open up free trade. Additionally, we shouldn't have any preference or a relationship with anyone that gives them greater consideration or deference over any other. It really should just be based on who has the superior product or service. So that's something that needs to be done. And the other thing that's hugely important for me is criminal justice reform.
Yeah.
Now, granted, I can't do that on a state level, though I can certainly talk about what's wrong at the state level. But on a federal level, I can do something about that. And it's hugely important to me to basically hold all federal prosecutors responsible for valuing a conviction over actually seeking the truth. The whole point and purpose of our Jeffersonian model of jurisprudence was to basically ensure that regardless of economic status or station, individuals were given the same representation and consideration in the court of law. They were to be treated equally. That's why we have civil liberties. That's why you have habeas corpus and mens and actus rea. That's why you
Right,
have
right,
due
right.
process.
Yep.
All of that stuff is designed to prevent you from being victimized by the state. And the purpose of a prosecutor is to seek the truth, not a conviction, the truth. That's their job. But obviously, when they are rewarded for conviction rates, when they're
Right.
rewarded for, when police are rewarded for arresting people and prosecutors are rewarded for putting people in jail, then there is no incentive to find the truth. There's only incentive to continue to enact harm. So that's something that really needs to be brought to light. And that means that people who have committed no real crime, and this means like there's no victim.
Right.
We have a whole bunch of laws that say you're a criminal for doing all sorts of things, but a law
Every day,
does not,
yeah. Yep.
right. But that law is not necessarily indicative of an actual crime. A crime is where there's a victim. If you choose to smoke a joint, who are you harming? No one. I mean, I suppose some people could make the argument that you're harming yourself, but they're going to put you in prison to teach you a lesson because you're harming yourself. That's absurd.
If
It's
you
your
eat
body,
too,
you're right.
if you eat too many carbs, you're harming yourself. Like, where is the line that we draw that if you're doing, X, Y, Z, but you can harm yourself up to this point. Up to this point, we care so much about you, we're going to put you in a cage to keep you from harming yourself. That'll fix it.
That's right. It's okay for you to drink beer, but my God, if you have a big gulp, you're going in the slammer.
If you have,
Like,
if you can have 2 beers. If you have 4 beers, you're out of here. No,
That's right.
And like you said, the system right now, we talk about presumption of innocence, and yet because it's a, I guess, merit-based system or a points-based system, the entire system is predicated on you have to get as many, if you're a police officer, as many arrests as possible. If you're a prosecutor, you have to get as many prosecutions as possible and as many convictions as possible. And the problem is that assumes that everyone that gets in front of you is guilty, and you just have to adjudicate them into being guilty. You have to process them to guilt. And that's how we end up with the system we have now. So I was very interested in reading you have some very bold positions, ending all the current wars, essentially opening the borders and giving amnesty to peaceful people that are here already illegally, pardoning all felons of victimless crimes. You said that Titanic was not a good movie. That was very bold. And by the way, you made Matt's day with that, because that's a big chip he has on his shoulder since like 1998 or whenever that came out. That was a terrible movie. And
I don't recall. I mean, did we get into the weeds on that one? Because I went to school for film. I want to let you know this. Like, before I got my degrees in communication poli-sci, I have an associate's in applied science and motion picture television. And then I think I spent a solid decade pretending I was Martin Scorsese and just watching movies back to back to back.
right.
So there's a whole period of time where I never went on dates. But the point is,
Who needs dates? You have American film.
right? They interrupt anyway. They want to talk about themselves. I'm trying to watch the movie.
Exactly.
But yeah, when Titanic came out, I was in high school. And at the time, and I'm just ashamed to admit it, like, this is the lowest point in time in my life. And if this is the worst thing I ever did, I guess I'm doing okay. I came home and I sobbed for the love of Jack and Rose. I did. My little girlish teenage heart sobbed for them. And mind you, I was a goth in high school. That's not okay. Like, we don't sob. We're dead.
You're dead inside.
But then as you get older and you watch more movies and you see it, you're like, oh my God, this is just pap. It's totally trite. I mean, just short of being a Nicholas Sparks movie, which you know is going to be pap because it's Nicholas Sparks.
Right.
It was so manipulative. It was emotionally manipulative crap. I would much rather watch a movie that was just about the disaster in and of itself. Who cares about these people? I just want to know about the disaster and what happened after that.
Jack, I love you, but you have to die. Well, no, I think there's plenty of room for. Nope, you have to die, and then I'm going to throw the diamond in the sea. However, no. So bold positions. But what actually struck me is you're an anarchist, right?
Yep, that's true.
You're an anarchist, and yet your positions, if you go to ruffphillips2020.com and read her positions, they're pretty in line with what a strict constitutionalist would support. Like, the ones that have given up their, fear of foreigners and things like that and actually read the Constitution and seen where it actually limits the powers, or is supposed to limit the powers of government too. This would be, in my mind, as a former constitutionalist and now recovering Spoonerist, I would read that. The old me would have read that and been like, yeah, that's pretty good. Was that an intentional thing, or is this just your sort of your mechanism for achieving statelessness is using the plain language in the Constitution of saying we really need to limit government first and then going from there?
It's a couple of things. The reason why we're doing this is twofold. I mean, one, it is a step toward ultimately a stateless society, but it's also, in that conversation is a recognition that our culture has been indoctrinated into a mindset that at worst, government is still a necessary evil. So we have sort of the society of people who've never truly have never experienced freedom. We talk about it in jingoistic terms during Independence Day or whatever. We invoke nationalistic or traditionalistic sentiments, but nobody's actually tasted what truly freedom is. So we have to combat that mentality. Additionally, we use government as basically a cure for all of our existential crises. Like, I feel bad about some event happening, so I'm going to turn to my elected representative to do something about it because I'm
proxy,
too overworked. Right. I'm too overworked. I'm too overtaxed. I'm too overtired. I can't do anything about it. But it makes me feel a little bit better about the terrible things because somebody's doing something somewhere.
Exactly.
So that's kind of where we're at culturally. So what we wanted to do when we crafted our platform is we wanted to talk about these things only within as a sort of a first step. Like, this is what we're going to do in these parameters so that we can actually have people see what truly having a constitutional republic as it was designed was supposed to be. That's step one. Taste a little bit of freedom, feels good. Let's get some more, right? But the other aspect of it is because self-ownership and personal responsibility are a huge aspect of the whole libertarian philosophy. What we felt was important was to be able to say, yes, we are seeking the highest executive office in the land. This is true. However, we're going to create constraints on what we can and cannot do. And we're going to use this mold as indicia of our pledge to you that we are not going to go outside of these lanes because personal responsibility and self-ownership is hugely important. And you need to be able to trust that I will not go beyond this. People need to have that trust again. I'm not saying you should trust necessarily politicians, but if you are electing somebody to represent you in government, you need to be able to trust that they are going to do what they say they're going to do within the parameters of that office. So that's kind of the twofold aspect to it.
Or at least try. at least intend to. I agree 100%. The entire basis of libertarianism is you own yourself, you own your body, you own the product of you own your labor, you own the product of your labor, which means you own your property. That's an inherently empowering and empathetic message, which we sometimes present in less than empathetic ways, but that's a whole other subject. We're
working on it.
We have our moments, but someone described it as LPD, Libertarian Personality Disorder, and it's a real thing. But we have this great message, and you're right. You use the constitutional framework and it also presents the narrative that when we get elected and we swear to uphold my constitution, we'll actually do it, as opposed to the other parties who use that as, like you said, like a jingoistic, the Constitution, which is like this abstract term they use to refer to whatever it is they decide they want to do. So no, I agree 100% on that. Now, while I have you here, will you sign on to the Muddied Waters Media platform, which is really just one thing, that we want to see a legalization of recreational plutonium?
I love how you just went right back to my screen. You're like,
will you or will you not?
Yeah, and then do the hand clasp where you're like, where's the heat lamp? Legalization or decriminalization? Which would you prefer?
I decriminalization, because I don't want them to tax my nukes.
There you go.
I don't want regulation and taxing of my nukes. So you support decriminalization of my recreational McNukes?
Yeah, well, technically, what you're asking is, do I support decriminalization of you owning something that you mined out of the earth? It's not technically a nuclear weapon until you're able to split the atom. But yes, I support your right to take from your property what you mined and do with it what thou wilt, provided, of course, you do not harm others.
Right, which is a big one with that. That would be a big one with thermonuclear weapons. Sadly, I lost all of mine in a tragic nuclear boating accident. Nuclear submarine accident. It was terrible.
So
The seas
that's
were.
how that underwater volcano occurred.
I wasn't going to say anything, but I may or may not have been near Japan in 2011. But
Was
so
it
okay,
a submarine that sank, perchance?
I've said enough. Bottom line is I don't have them anymore. It's very, very sad. So this is an interesting question I have, which is why I wrote it. Like me, you're against all taxation, short of ending the state and all taxes, which ideally is what we'd like. What would you consider as a secondary step? So like when people talk about all these different types of taxes, what do you consider to be the quote unquote ideal tax as we're working towards, not having any?
Oh my goodness. It's a good question.
I wrote it.
But I always find it a little bit frustrating getting asked this question, because you're effectively asking, would you prefer to be vaginally raped or anally raped? Like, it's still rape. You're still being negatively impacted. They're both terrible things. It doesn't make it slightly less worse because it's in your preferred orifice, So I realize that's like the most classless way of explaining this, but I think this show is kind of asking me to make some jokes, so I'm going to do it. But that's really the problem inherent in that question, is that it's saying like, would you prefer something terrible over something terrible?
Something
no,
else
I want
that's
neither.
terrible. Okay.
Right. Like, I have no desire to replace a bad concept with another bad concept, even if we feel that it might be slightly less worse. Rather, what I'd like to do is chip away at that bad concept until it's completely gone. Okay. I'd rather just get rid of and slowly roll back in whatever capacity we can the existing tax system, not replace it with something else.
Okay. Note to self: stop advocating for value-added anal tax. Okay. So, it's a shortcoming of mine. So obviously
now I see how you got your wife. Good girl.
Yeah, there's so many things I'm not going to say now. So obviously the biggest thing everyone's been talking about for the last several days has been gun control because of these mass shootings. We had the Gilroy, California shooter and the El Paso shooter, who both appear to have been white nationalists. Actually, the El Paso shooter was like a white national socialist. Then you've got the Dayton, Ohio shooter, who appears to have been a Democratic socialist who supported Bernie Sanders and Liz Warren. Obviously, right now, it is very difficult to talk about our beliefs about gun control, because you have people who are inundated with fear for themselves and their children and loved ones. They're being inundated with mass media programming designed to, get them to want to disarm. And then you're dealing with a lot of libertarians who will say stuff like, my guns matter more than your children. And it doesn't augur well for us often. I actually posted a couple days ago, I said, this was like on Friday or Saturday, and I said, if you're not able to advocate for gun rights in a way that doesn't demonstrate empathy for others, maybe just get off the internet until Tuesday. So just maybe get off the internet. How do you, and how then should we, what do you think right now is a good way to message to people while also empathizing to people? Because this is a scary time. This is a time when both parties are talking about some serious restrictions on the types of guns we can have, the types of people who can have them. How do we combat that without coming off as seeming like we don't care about people that are being, killed in the street?
Right. Well, I think that this is something that, we always run into. There's a tragedy that occurs, and it, of course, is incredibly heartbreaking and terrible. And then the natural response is, well, we need to do something. There's something that has to be done. And again, because we do look at government as the solution for all that ails us, that is kind of a natural response for people nowadays to look to government to solve this problem. But some things cannot be solved by government, and really, well, actually nothing can.
Nothing can be solved.
Nothing can be solved by government. Government doesn't do anything well. It can't even solve itself.
Right.
So My big thing that I would say to anyone who is very rattled by this tragedy, as they very well should be, is that I would strongly caution them from making rash decisions. Just because a good example would be 9/11. 9/11 is a prime example of a huge tragedy that befell and affected all of us deeply. And in the response to that, what did we end up with? We had the USA Patriot Act rammed through within a matter of hours. We increased the size of the surveillance state. We increased the scope of the federal government at the expense of our civil liberties. And we started to engage in more warfare, which right now we're currently in Afghanistan longer than we were in Vietnam.
Yeah.
And all of that is a knee-jerk response to fear. We have to stop allowing fear to dictate to us what we should do. Instead, we need to take pause, permit ourselves as a nation and as individuals to grieve. We should absolutely take time to feel our feelings and grieve, because it's a horrendous thing and it is heartbreaking.
Yeah, absolutely.
But we also should allow those feelings to be dealt with in a constructive, healthy way before we ever turn around and try and make something of it. Because I think that the solutions we would create would end up being effectively a immediate feel-good moment that comes at the extraordinary expense of everyone else's natural rights.
Yeah.
So that's my caution to anyone with respect to this. And it doesn't change my opinion on gun control. I am vehemently opposed to gun control because I think that it's important for people to defend themselves. And I think events like this really drive home the point how critical it is that we have that direct capability ourselves, because we cannot expect our first responders to be there and stop something like that right that minute. It would mitigate the loss of life if people had access to means of self-defense, and if we actually were able to do so. So that's kind of where we're at. And that's sort of my feeling on it. Do feel bad, because it is horrible, and take time to feel bad, grieve, but don't do anything until you've had an opportunity to truly think about it and the long-term consequences of the decisions you make here on out.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, it when you think about the fact that the Dayton shooter was not able to kill as many people because police were able to take him down. They were already right there because he was in like a nightlife district, and they were able to take him down in like less than a minute after the shooting began. It's impossible for armed police to be everywhere. And if we lived in that kind of reality where armed police were always a minute away, I can assure you that's not a world you'd want to live in. It'd be a very scary place.
Right.
So to me, when I see these things, I think, how many more of these things have to happen before we start advocating for fewer people to be defenseless? Unfortunately, that's obviously not how most people are looking at it, because that's not how they've been, for lack of a better term, programmed to think about it. Now, as you know, very often, both on the right and the left of the, I guess, authoritarian spectrum and in the general public and at large, libertarianism has been a hard sell often. The message of liberty at time has been a hard sell. How responsible am I for that?
Oh, goodness. The fact that you bring levity to the discussion is actually probably greater than, what you talked about with the LPD. And in fact, I kind of want to circle back and discuss that, if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Go ahead. This would be the time to talk about it.
Yeah, I have a theory that's unsubstantiated. It's not been through a peer review. It's never been featured in a scholarly journal. Therefore, it's probably not scientific, but I'm going to roll with it anyway. You ready?
Okay. Yes.
Okay. My theory is that because we go through this intellectual journey, very few people start out as libertarians, but they go through this intellectual journey where they see the fraud, waste, and abuse that's inherent in the state, and they reject it. And they come to this point where they realize, oh my goodness, we are living in effectively a soft tyranny, and it's not going to get better. It's this creeping totalitarianism, and it's terrifying, particularly if you have children, because then you're like, well, if it's bad for me now, how horrible is it going to be for them there? So there's this moral imperative we feel as libertarians to do something about it. We're terrified. We're scared. We want to make our world a better place. And even though ideally we would probably live by ourselves and not really communicate with anybody, because at the end of it, we want to be left alone to do what we will.
Yep.
We feel like we're effectively forced into getting into politics, which we despise, to do something about these things that terrify us. But because of the fact that it's so urgent and dire, and terrifying. And so many people seem to reject what we say because it's one of my friends classified it as we're like Cassandra. We can predict the future, but nobody believes what we say. Like we see the writing on the wall, but nobody's listening.
And we keep saying what's going to happen, and it happens, and we go, and everyone's like, well, we got to vote for the right person next time. It's like, no. This yes, but these are not the right people that we're referring to. So yeah, no, exactly. We keep telling them, and they're not listening. Yeah.
Yeah, and they're like, yeah, no, you were right about those 8-9 things back there, but
you're totally wrong about
I don't
this.
want the Democrats to win, so I'm going to double down and vote for this knucklehead. And you're like, oh God.
Yeah.
You're not helping. So yeah, there comes that frustration, and that frustration is naturally going to spill over in very unhealthy ways. And that sometimes reflects itself in how we communicate to others and each other, because, we're so passionate and we're scared and we're frustrated. And we don't always handle it well. That's really what it boils down to. It's not that we have a personality disorder. It's that we have this urgency. And this urgency is not manifesting in the results that we need to see in order to not feel terrified by our government anymore.
Right.
And then we get a little yelly online.
Yeah. We were economically conservative and socially awkward. We, so I didn't coin that, by the way. And we're also tend to be very unique individuals that are very cerebral. Put it this way: when I was in school, I was a little kid, and my teachers I was a disciplinary problem. This was in the late '80s, and my teachers brought my parents in and said, "Mr. and Mrs. Cohen, we believe that your son is retarded." And they said no. I don't think that's true because he's pretty smart. And they went, no, he's definitely a retard. And they said we're going to give him a test to see where he falls in our retard spectrum. And these were their words, by the way. And I would never say this. And so I took their IQ test. I scored the absolute highest that one could score on a test for retards. And so they said, well, okay, then our son's okay. And they said, no, actually, no, this is, we're coming across this. We're going to put him in some class, a class for very smart retards. And they now call that honors classes. And so this is a party for what my teachers would have called very smart retards. And the problem is, if we want to get outside of this sort of knitting circle of intellectualism we've created, we have to make connections that a lot of us just really don't want to make with normal people, and make those connections to actually grow it into a movement that can affect change. So no, I'm right there with you, but I have no good segue for this. But it is time for me to talk about Anchor. Hey guys, are you thinking of making a podcast? Well, I hope you are, because if you are, Anchor is the easiest way to make a podcast. Anchor gives you everything you need in one place for free, which you can use right from your phone or computer. They have creation tools, you see, that allow you to record and edit your podcast so it sounds great. They'll distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard everywhere. Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and many more. Now get this, you can easily make money from your podcast, as we do, with no minimum listenership. That is incredible. That is actually very incredible. So if you're thinking of making a podcast, be sure to download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started today and let us know. And if, unless your content is horrifying, we'll subscribe to you if you subscribe to us. But don't be Nazis or something. Be something we could sign off on. Speaking of podcasting, your husband is Johnny Adams, better known as Johnny Rocket.
That's right.
He is one of the people, when I started this podcast, I'm like, I hope my show's as good as Johnny Rocket's, although he's got that really cool, kind of gritty voice, whereas I sound like the token Jewish news anchor on your local program. But now, did you guys meet in the Liberty Movement, or how did that happen?
Yeah, we actually met because of his podcast.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he was the first person to interview me after I announced.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, that's how I met him. And then we just had such a stitch on the radio that we kept talking afterward, and the rest is history.
Oh, so y'all just got married?
Yeah, in April.
Oh, wait, how long have you been running for president?
Since July of last year.
Oh, wow. So okay, that's when I started my show. I was so enveloped in my show for the first few months, I didn't even, because I think I first heard of you running earlier this year. So that's very interesting. So I have a question which is very, I wrote it, which is why it's good. A lot of my viewers, I need a better segue than that. But a lot of my viewers and listeners are anarchists like us, many of whom believe that voting is violence and that therefore we shouldn't vote, which you're an anarchist like me. It's a compelling message. What is your message to them?
Well, I pretty much am. The reason why I am involved in politics, notwithstanding the fact that I do want to affect change, and this is the vehicle by which I do it, is that I recognize that we have a defensive aspect to us being involved in politics, and we should look at voting as a matter of being defensive. You know, I know that it's not ideal. The system in and of itself is aggressive, and it's based on aggression, which is the idea that you as an individual can cast a vote, and if there's a simple majority, then whatever will be applied to everyone equally.
Everybody,
and that's, of course,
yep.
Right. So the system in and of itself is flawed because of that. But this is the existing system that we have. And while as much as I would love to say we should opt out, I think things like Ruby Ridge and Waco are illustrative of the fact that that's not really something the government's going to let us do. So you have a choice. You can either opt out of voting and then just deal with whatever that simple majority of those who choose to vote give you, or you can vote defensively. You can vote for a candidate who actually represents what you believe in. Or you can run for office yourself. You can vote for Harambe. I mean, that's a defensive measure. What if he actually got all those votes? I mean, that's my question. Like, if he actually got it,
what are you going to do?
They just trot out
Dig
a dead gorilla.
Dig him up and put his paw on the Constitution because we voted for this guy.
Right. Oh, man. You know, he probably did more good in his brief, sad life than most of the people who've been president have done. So,
what did he do? What did he do wrong other than pull a kid's pants up after he fell? Nothing.
Yeah. He straightened him out, sent him on his way, and they're like, you got to die.
Brushed him off and said, there you go. And then they killed him.
They're like, since we can't shoot the parents, we're going to have to kill the gorilla.
God. That's
I just
sadly,
lost everybody's vote, didn't I?
but that's sadly, that is truer than I think any of us want to admit. We have a comment from Jimmy Mahaney, who said, I was an official messaging director for an LP candidate. There's a line in marketing that people don't buy products, they buy results. But libertarians keep trying to sell the product, which are the policies, not the result of those policies. We keep winning debates, but have the worst marketing department. And winning debates is a relative term. When we get all the facts right, but everyone there hates us, we won. But did we win, or did we make a bunch of enemies while demonstrating our correctness to ourselves?
Do you mean like how we won in 2016 because we did better than we did in 2012? Like that kind of winning?
I guess so.
Yeah.
It's a big victory there.
This is like the great irony of being libertarian. Like the self-ownership and personal responsibility, we prize a system of meritocracy. We want the most successful people to indeed achieve, the folks that have the greatest skills and capabilities to do well. And yet when it comes to our politics, like our actual performance as a political party, we're like, we did it. It's very participation prize. And it's so sad and weird. Like, that's not good, guys.
We showed up.
Yeah. I mean, good job on trying. And there's a lot of wonderful people who worked very, very hard on the Johnson Weld campaign. Right. I will not ever cast aspersions on their efforts and endeavors. But to walk away from that and then feel like we did well. I joked with a buddy of mine where I was like, okay, we got like 1 million votes in 2012. We got 4 million votes in 2016. That's a 300% increase or a 400% increase. If we just keep getting like a 400% increase, we'll have this in lock in like
we'll have 3 billion votes by the end of 2040. Yeah, no, I mean it is. It's very participation trophy. It's very like world's greatest dad shirt after an election. Like world's greatest libertarian. We did the best of any libertarian running. And, and also we've got a trade war and, concentration camps on the border.
Right.
So
but if you as a candidate can at least, at the very minimum, convince just by your rhetoric and passion, and of course, you standing firm on what you believe, if you can, at the very minimum, convince a Republican or a Democrat to start parroting and employing those talking points and bring it into the greater cultural conversation, now that is something to say you've achieved.
Right.
Like, that's significant.
What do you think? I agree with all of that. What do you think this comes from, our seeming desire to find the newest failed Republican or former Republican and throw him up on the mantle and say, this is our guy because more people have heard of him than us? And, you know, and I have nothing wrong with, I have no problems with Gary Johnson or Bob Barr or Justin Amash or whatever. But why, like, where do you think this comes from that we are like so worried about a guy who, in this case, probably wouldn't win a primary in his home district because he, you know, bashed the de facto head of his former party, as opposed to having someone like you, who's an actual libertarian who can actually articulate libertarian beliefs and ideology and present a stark contrast from the two, you know, heads of the duopoly of the constant war and caging party. Where do you think that comes from?
Well, I think this actually kind of rolls back into our conversation about the libertarian personality disorder, because of the fact that we do recognize what's going on and we are terrified and we feel we have a moral imperative to do something about it. There is kind of this desperation inherent in that feeling where we need to get whatever we can to make a splash, make a difference, get that media attention, get these things done and drive it home. And so
Right.
a lot of people look at it like, well, what's going to get us media attention? Well, somebody who's already garnered media attention is going to do that. What else is going to be significant or newsworthy? Well, somebody who previously held political office, regardless of the laws that they enacted or how badly they
That's
did.
what I mean. Like,
So I think that's kind of where it comes in. But the problem with that mentality, and this is the tough part, because I think that, you know, we do want to see something significant happen right now. So, you know, something's got to change. That's a fact. We don't realize that this is a marathon and not a sprint. All of this is a marathon and not a sprint. We did not get government to this level overnight. And in order to roll it back and to get it truly to a point where we can start talking about, not just talking about, but actually engaging in a stateless society, it's going to take a long time. It's like weight loss. It's a battle of attrition. And knowing that, we need to be able to hunker down and hold out longer. And we have to have people who are legitimately decent standard bearers doing so.
right.
Because if we try to get the immediate results, but at the expense of what we believe, then again, that's another we've achieved nothing. So that's really sort of the problem that we're experiencing.
It's not a marathon, it's not a sprint. It is a marathon. But yet, when you think of, I mean, this time in 2015, Donald Trump was polling at like 3%. So a lot of stuff can happen running even in a third party. Obviously, the main point of running for any office, but especially as president, as a libertarian, obviously you want to win. If you do not win, you can at least use earned media to push the message of libertarianism, which 99% of people have not really heard. They've heard of libertarians, but then they see libertarians as, you know, boomer former Republicans who smoke a lot of weed and don't know the capitals of countries that we're bombing. And again, that's not an aspersion against any. That wasn't anyone.
Boomer.
No. I wasn't saying you. I'm saying like the people that we've been. That wasn't about you. By the way, I wasn't talking about anyone in particular there. But I mean, instead of doing that, you could use that earned media to actually push actual libertarianism, and you could even get, if you don't win, get a big enough number in the polling to force the Democrat and Republican candidates to add libertarian positions to their platform and potentially even add it to their actual policy prescriptions if they get elected and you don't. take a page from the progressives who figured out 100 years ago that it doesn't matter which party wins as long as we just keep creeping forward with what we want. They don't look at it as a sprint. They're okay with Donald Trump getting, as much as they pretend not to. If Donald Trump gets reelected, that's fine. So long as he keeps pushing stuff that was, the standard Democrat talking points 10, 15, 20 years ago, they're fine with that. And we need to adopt that same thing. Having a Kim Ruff or any of the other candidates. By the way, we're not officially endorsing anyone, but I really like this one. But no endorsement, not an endorsement. But at least not yet. To have someone like you running, who, yes, you could win. You could win as much as anyone else can. If you do not win, you could at least be a face for libertarianism that the vast majority of Americans have never been exposed to. Why we would do that instead of looking at a guy who's not running for president and not running as a libertarian and throwing our panties at him and going, Justin, please, Justin, can you hear? I love you. And he's not even, he's a liberty adjacent conservative, which is fine. But I don't get it.
Yeah, I would like it if people threw their panties at me. That's the real.
If I had known,
bummed me out.
I got a sock. I could throw.
I'm free. I'm all like Dobby the house elf.
This is the most undergarment I have right now. I apologize, but if I had forethought, I would have gotten like a bra from the closet or something, and my wife's bra, to be clear.
Laying at me like I'm Tom Jones.
Yeah, like Tom Jones, exactly, like Tom Jones. You're the Elvis Presley of libertarianism. So
I'm dead, is what you're saying.
You're the 19. You're the thin Elvis from the 50s and 60s that we all grew up to. Well, I wasn't alive yet, but that our parents grew up to love. This analogy is not going well.
It's okay. But yeah, I love what you had to say, everything that you had to say, because that's one of the things I always talk about is, you look at the way that the socialists did. They tried to be very forefront in politics at the turn of the 20th century. And then when that didn't yield the results they wanted, what instead they did was they infiltrated academia, unions, the legal system. They went into all these other areas and started to push those ideas that way. And then that became part of the larger cultural conversation, and that manifested in a socio-political sea change. That is how we got to this point. So I always tell people it's like Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. We're going to do everything they did backwards and in heels. That's effectively what we're trying to do. You have to trim it back. You got to roll it back, and you can absolutely take a page from their playbook. The other thing is that in the era of the internet and social media, the game it's changed. It's not the same as it used to be. I mean, I don't know if you studied media at all, but one of the things that we talk about a lot in media is with respect to when we went from radio to television and how that changed the debate. Because, a really prime example that's often trotted out is the debate between John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon.
How they looked. Yeah.
Right. You listen to it on the radio. Nixon had it on lockdown. You watched it on TV. Well, JFK, with that weird disease that he had, looks very swarthy, like he'd been in Bermuda. And just came in off of the golf course, whereas Nixon didn't have anybody put any makeup on him, and then he was like sweating and looked uncomfortable. So this is something that they had to pivot politically and adjust to.
What disease? Wait.
Yeah,
what disease did?
Oh goodness, I don't know what it's called, but if you Google it, you'll find out. He had some sort of I think it was I don't know if. I'd have to look it up. I'll let you know later. But yes, he did have a disease that made his skin look that bronzed. So
that's quite a disease to have.
Yeah, right. Well, and it had a bunch of other aspects to it as well, like respiratory illness and stuff. Just random facts for you. Just random things I know.
Did not know that. Yeah.
Well, he's dead now. I don't remember how, but yes, he's since passed. Anyway.
Could have been that disease.
Yeah. Anyway, my point is they had to adjust. They had to pivot in that age of television.
Right.
And now the same thing can be said about social media. And that's something that's going to make it fundamentally different. Trump was successful, not just because he had an assist from things like Cambridge Analytica, but also because of the fact that he exploited social media. That's a huge way of getting out to people. Now, granted, he also exploited the least common denominator, which is like hysterical racism and bigotry and played on
fear.
people's fear of the other.
He played on fear and turned it into those. He weaponized it into those things.
Right.
Yeah.
But it got people out the door and at the poll.
Yeah.
And so we have to absolutely look at those successes as much as we dislike them and see what worked for them. Now, I would strongly recommend people not put out hysterically racist content or racist content at all. Like, even if it was just like low key racist, like, don't do it.
Non-hysterical racist content. Yeah.
But you take advantage of social media, take advantage of word of mouth, get that information out. And we can, of course, do the same thing documentarians do, which is if you've ever seen the formula for a documentary, it's very basic, which is for the first 90 minutes of the documentary, they scare the bejesus out of you about whatever issue, like, oh my God, the honeybees are going away, or whatever the situation is. And then the last 30 minutes, they're like, now here's what you can do at home. You can recycle plastic. Yeah. It has bupkis to do with honeybees, but it's a feel-good thing. It gives people some hope.
It gives them something to do.
Right. And that's like totally what we do in our own messaging in our campaign, because we get asked a lot of questions about what do you think about some state or local law?
Right.
And the reality is, I can't do anything about that. This is federal office. I have nothing to do with that. I can talk about these things on a federal level. I cannot enforce those things if they're on a federal level. But here's what you can do at home. You can, whether it's work on a referendum or recall or initiative, you can write your legislator, you can work with an NGO or a nonprofit to put forward legislation. And there's a billion things you can do at home if this is something you care about. And that's our documentary end. Government is terrible. Government is scary. We live in a soft tyranny. We're marching toward totalitarianism. But here's what you can do.
Here's what you can do. Yeah. We've got a lot of comments from people that are legitimately worried about the bees, by the way. So if you want to, you might want to add
they really should be, because it's actually gotten to, random fact, but because of the fact that honeybees have gone away, we actually are at the point where you have scientists who are going to have to basically go and inseminate, good God, how can I not think of this word? Pollinate plants to ensure that they continue to thrive. So it's actually pretty horrible what's going on with the honeybees. It has nothing to do with recycling plastic, though.
Coming soon, the bee plank of the Ruff Phillips campaign. So I have just a couple.
Plan B.
If you call it that, I will endorse you on our very next episode. If you have a thing called Plan BEE and it's like a detailed libertarian thing, I can't not endorse you at that point.
Right, so, and then Plan C is about something maritime related.
You should do a whole thing. Plan D is like, I could go so many places. There's nothing. So
America needs love.
America needs love. We're gonna give America that D, and here's what you can do. So I wanted to ask you, because I know I've got, I think, about maybe 15, 20 minutes left. Is that correct with you?
Yes.
Okay. So I wanted to ask you your opinion. I don't even know if you have an opinion on this. I read what I'm told is a hit piece and watched a little bit of a clip, so I'm not fully sure what was going on. Do you have much of an opinion to give on this Libertarian Party, LNC, Nick Sarwark, $75 an hour thing? Like, I've gotten so many conflicting reports that I don't even know what to think. Do you really have a strong opinion one way or the other on it?
Oh, honey, I have opinions on everything, but out of respect for the people, I'm like, I got opinions on everything. Sure, I mean, I absolutely do have an opinion on it, but out of respect for all the individuals involved and the fact that my running mate is a sitting member of the LNC, as is my husband, I have chosen to abstain from vocalizing any of those opinions because I think it's important to keep it separated.
Okay. Yeah, no problem. And like I said, we are not really banging the drum one way or the other. I listened to and read and watched enough where I'm like, yeah, I'm not fully sure what happened here, but I'm not active enough in the LNC to really, agitate one way or the other. So I've made peace with it. So we have some questions from our followers before we go to our lightning round, which is going to be fun. Yeah, lightning round. Final My Fellow Americans, we call it. So a few questions from followers. Number one, what would you say are the 3 worst things that Trump has done while in office? If you had to pick the top 3.
3 worst things. There's just so many.
It's a cornucopia of bad things. Yeah.
Yeah, there's just a melange of terrible things. I used a French word. I'm not sure if it's correct.
That's classy. It sounded classy, if nothing else. It sounded classy.
I would say one of the things that really stands out in my mind, and actually I've discussed this a couple times because when we were discussing the Mueller report, when this whole conversation was happening on social media and beyond, a lot of people were saying, well, he needs to be impeached. And in the case of the Mueller report, that whole thing says that, okay, there may not have been a crime, but he may have obstructed our ability to investigate this non-crime. That's not an impeachable offense. However, if you do want to impeach the president, what you could do is go after him for continuing the unconstitutional war in Yemen. That's a totally impeachable offense. That's a good one.
Yeah.
Of course, in order to do that, you would also have to go after Obama because he's the one who started it. So that's something that is incredibly horrible that he's done, is continuing to perpetuate this war. In fact, we have, I think, 9 active wars, if you include advisors and drone strikes going on currently, not just Afghanistan and Iran. So, yeah, I would say those are terrible things that he's done. The saber-rattling BS that was going on with Iran was incredibly irresponsible. I think that was an awful thing that he was doing. Now, all of us, of course, who are very, vaguely well-versed on foreign history recognize the fact that things like the Gulf of Tonkin and the Lusitania and other events have been, either they didn't happen at all or they did happen, but the extent to which was greatly overblown in order to justify warfare. And it's just, from a libertarian's perspective, it's just so superficially obvious what's going on that you're like, how is anybody thinking this is a real thing?
Boats being attacked in gulfs. It's just their standard go-to. It's like Cards Against Humanity. They throw out boats being attacked in gulfs and then go on. So okay.
Yeah, like Mad Libs. I like that. Yeah, it's a.
But they just keep using the same Mad Lib for the last 120 years. Boats being attacked in gulfs. We have to do it now. So
yeah, it's so true. I mean, because it's not really something that's substantiated. If you have a land conflict, if somebody drops a bomb, there's obviously going to be fallout. You have things to substantiate, evidence to prove that. But in a case of, something happened on the seas, that's a little bit more difficult to do a post event and try and find that evidence. So
exactly.
That I thought was highly irresponsible of him to allow that to occur. The other aspect that I would say that is really irresponsible of him is enacting all these tariffs. And you can see that negatively impacting people just on your day to day. I was just saying last night that when we were in Massachusetts, I'd gone out to lunch with my campaign director, and our waiter told us, if you want avocado, it's going to cost you $5 for an avocado, because just because of tariffs, it's so much more difficult to get these things imported.
Right.
Now, that's a very, very small example, and I can extrapolate how that affects manufacturing because that's the industry I work in. But because of tariffs, we have a situation where we can't get the goods or services that we want. We have other countries that are being punitive with us and trying to negatively impact our industries. And of course, we're preventing us from growing economically because whether we like it or not, the idea of buy American, only use American is a myth at this point, and we're an international economy. So that is another thing that's just, I'm flabbergasted by that one. On some of his political stuff, I'm like, well, he's not a politician. Maybe he just doesn't know where his office ends and, the rest of the world begins. But on the stuff that regards business, I'm like, how irresponsible.
Yeah.
Were you ever successful? And if you look at his track record, his successes are largely built on bankruptcy, restructuring, and then doing it again with a handout. So no, he's not a bad person per se. I don't think that he's an evil incarnate, but he's done quite a lot of really illogical, harmful things.
Okay. Do you find the labeling of the migrant detention facilities on the border as concentration camps to be an accurate label?
Yes, absolutely. Anytime you inter somebody, indefinitely, the state is responsible for keeping people interred for indefinitely. Yeah, absolutely. That's a concentration camp. You can gussy it up in any other term you want to, but it is what it is. Whether we're doing it to the Japanese during World War II or it was done to the Jews during the Holocaust, It's still the same thing. You're forcing people to live in effectively a ghetto indefinitely because they're doing something you deem unacceptable.
Right. Yeah. So the history lesson here for those who disagree with this, and you're wrong, is that in the very first camps to be called concentration camps in German, I think that's German, was in the 1920s, prior to the Holocaust or even Hitler. It was to house refugee Jews that were seeking asylum from the genocide, the pogroms in Russia. So they were called concentration camps. They were not part of the Holocaust or any genocide. They were there to basically create tough conditions for refugees to deter them from coming, which is exactly what's happening on the southern border right now. So it is I just want to get your opinion on that before telling you the correct opinion. Do you consider yourself a feminist? These are interesting questions for my followers.
Yeah, actually, these are very enjoyable. Yes, I do consider myself a feminist, but my feminism is nowhere near what the third and fourth and whatever the hell is going on wave.
87 dimension wave feminism. Yeah.
I was like, what? The waves keep coming?
It's tsunami feminism.
Yeah, the way that I classify my feminism is strictly a matter of recognizing that women, just like every other individual, are endowed with the natural rights to life, liberty, and justly acquired property. Property being defined as your body and the fruits of your labor. Right. And you have every right to do with it as you see fit, provided, of course, you don't infringe on the rights of others. That is something that, regardless of gender or sex or religion or creed or any other aspect that could subdivide us, we are all endowed with these natural rights. So as a feminist, my perspective is that, just because we're women doesn't mean we should be denied the same amount of respect for those natural rights. If somebody infringes on them, they should be held as equally accountable were it done to a man. And if we violate somebody's rights, we should be held equally accountable as were we a man. So that's really where my feminism is legitimate equality. And to be clear on equality, because this is something that's oftentimes misunderstood, there's two types of equality. There's negative equality, that concept of equality of opportunity. Right. And then there's equality of outcome, which would be the positive equality, one where society somehow has this duty to provide these things for you, ensure that you all end up with the same thing. Now, I reject equality of outcome. I prefer, the only equality that's acceptable to me as a feminist is equality of opportunity, which is I should be able to achieve to the extent of my capabilities, my knowledge, skills, and abilities.
Right.
And not have any sort of limitations to those. In the same token, though, I should not have any handicaps afforded me or handouts or assists. I should be able to do it based strictly on my own merit. And if I'm good at what I do, I should be rewarded, commensurate to that. And that's something I'll negotiate with my business, the business owner. And if I'm not good at it, then I shouldn't have that opportunity. It's that simple.
Yeah.
So, and I think a lot of women actually do feel that way because there's something very frustrating about those kind of equal opportunity laws that are put forward to give women effectively, like Title IX or whatever. They give us that handicap, that leg up and that hand out. It's offensive and paternalistic. That's actually the great irony. Is there's nothing more just insulting to our character.
Yeah, it's very misogynistic that you need this thing.
Right.
If you're going to do as well as the boys, then, you're going to need this, handicap assistance. Yeah.
Right. And, on a deep level, on an emotional level, it's actually incredibly destructive to your concept of self-worth. Right. Because you don't actually know if what you achieved was done because you were legitimately good at it or if because somebody was just cutting you a favor. And the same token, you want to be able to own your successes and you want to be able to own your failures. That's the ideal experience for anybody. So that's where I come from as a feminist. But when it starts to get into this, we're better than, we need greater consideration, men are dirt, all that other nonsense, I'm out. I want nothing to do with that silliness. And
no affirmative action for chicks. That's how I put it. Yeah. Ruff Phillips 2020. So we got a lot of comments from people, all outraged about the whole avocado thing. That let's make something clear. Something like half of all the goods that you as an American consume are either imported from Mexico or contain at least one component that was imported from Mexico. And I think if you add things that are made with things that have components that are imported from Mexico, the number goes up even higher.
Oh yeah.
It is impossible in the economy that we live in the world, the quality of life we've created for ourselves, to expect to get well-priced, easily available goods and services across the entire spectrum of goods and services within the 48 states and Alaska and Hawaii. And especially when you're looking at your immediate neighbors like Mexico, Canada, the Caribbean, and then, yes, also China, it's impossible not to need them for that. And if you really want to not need them for that, or need them less, then you push for deregulation within our domestic market so that our small businesses and manufacturers aren't priced out of the market. Anyway, that's I could do a whole episode about that.
No.
I have one. Go ahead.
I absolutely love that, because this is something that's very interesting. And, in and amongst the many things that are of interest to me, just generally, industrial farming is something that's of interest to me. So I've watched a lot of documentaries, read a lot of books about it. One of the things is that because of the fact that we have that supermarket and we are very divorced from our food, we have been taught to expect to have certain foods year round, all the time.
Right.
Oranges, citrus only really is edible in wintertime. And, like peaches are summertime. That's like, there are times where these things are seasonally available. But because we have an international economy, we're able to have people on the other side of the equator send us stuff that's blooming for their seasons, so that we do have that luxury of eating all these things that we want to eat year round. So unless you want to get really, really comfortable with only eating with the seasons in your backyard. And believe you me, as somebody who lives in Arizona, where we have caliche soil and you can't grow hardly anything.
Exactly.
I'm not interested in it. So, you want to have that variability and dynamism in your diet, then absolutely you want to have an international economy.
Right. So final question. I agree 100%. Final question from the follower, and then we're going to go to final My Fellow Americans. Do you believe Antifa is a terrorist organization? These were some compelling questions, by the way, to my followers. I appreciate your questions.
Goodness, this is like the second time I've been asked this, and I'm like,
oh, really?
Okay, yeah, and it's funny because I'm like, there's nothing I can do about that as somebody running for president. Well, I think any group that engages in violent acts against others strictly because of a difference in ideology, as opposed to a matter of self-defense, could definitely qualify thusly. But in order to label them thusly, I have to say that they would be treated that way in the criminal justice system. And I don't know that that's appropriate. I would much rather it be on a individual by individual, case by case basis. So if there's a person who happens to be a member of Antifa and then does some violence against another, then they should absolutely be held accountable for that. Right. But Antifa as a whole, just like neo-Nazis as a whole, yes, you can have crazy ass ideas. That's fine. That's the reality about living in a world with some modicum of freedom. Yep. But if it manifests in you harming other people, then you as an individual need to be held accountable. So that's kind of where I'm on that. And I don't think that it's fair to say that just because this is a hate group or a terrorist group or any other label you want to assign to it, that their violence is somehow worse than were the same violence perpetrated by just some Joe Blow for whatever reason.
Right.
Like murder is murder is murder, regardless.
Assault is assault is assault. Yeah.
Right. So it doesn't make it somehow worse because it was Antifa. It's murder. You know,
Murder's
that makes
bad.
sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, it kind of, it's the same thing as like hate crime legislation. Crimes of violence are if it's done because you hate the person or because you didn't want them in your way or because you wanted their shoes and you wanted to take their, like, you've committed a crime. You've harmed someone. That's what matters, not your intent behind it. But I agree. And also the hypocrisy of us, talking about, individuals using violence for political aims when that's the entire basis of the state. But that's a whole other subject.
Yeah.
So that's
okay because they wear nice uniforms.
Exactly. If Antifa, if you really want to get on your game, you gotta write on fancy looking brown sheets of paper, and you gotta get some nice badges and stuff, and make it look nice, make it look legit.
Like some epaulets, Yeah,
like exactly. Yeah, get the different badges and make sure everyone has the same uniformity and everything. Then we'll be getting somewhere. So this is final My Fellow Americans, which I literally just started calling that now. Where I'm going to ask you a question. We're going to give you 30 seconds, And the way that this question goes is I'm going to name each of the Libertarian presidential candidates, and you're going to tell me the first Simpsons character that pops into your mind.
Oh,
and
no.
So,
no.
And so,
Oh, God.
no offense to anyone. And so we're going to put 30 seconds on the clock and start now. Adam Kokesh.
Oh my God. It's been so long since I watched The Simpsons. I kind of want to just call everybody who's a libertarian comic book guy, you know?
That's ideal. Arvin Vora.
God, I really like him. I don't even want to insult him.
Ben Leder, or Leader.
Goodness.
So
I guess to some extent I would say maybe Bart Simpson, because he's a bit of a rebel and he says incendiary things.
I tend to agree with that. The answer we actually had here.
Oh, you do have answers. Oh, good.
The answer
okay.
is they're all comic book guy. Is
that what you wrote? Yeah.
We'll say that's actually, we'll say that's what I wrote. I just want to get your opinion on which Simpsons character you are.
Oh goodness. Sometimes I feel like Marge Simpson. Where I'm like, guys, stop fighting. Although I do a really mean Ralph Wiggum, so maybe to some extent I'm him, where I'm like, I'm helping.
I would not of that group. I would not call you the Ralph Wiggums, but fair enough.
My cat's breath smells like cat food.
I'm in danger. So
the children are right to laugh at you, Ralph. Those things wouldn't cut butter.
I love that.
I do love him. He's like one of my favorite characters.
So no, I actually like. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, I think I actually joked with Matt about this, where I was saying that I always think of that band performance where they're like, on saxophone, Lisa Simpson, on triangle, Martin Prince, and with a flute up his nose, Ralph Wiggum. And then he's like, and his dad's like, that's some fine fluting, boy.
That's the libertarian debate. Is everyone with flutes up their nose?
Yeah.
That is funny. So I had a friend who she was devastated over the weekend. She used one of those internet things that asked her what what Flintstone character she was, and it told her she was Peggy Slaghoople, which I don't even know. Peggy Slaghoople, which is
Slaghoople.
I don't know who that is. I'm not sure that that's a real character, but that has been. She was sure she was Betty Rubble, and she was not. She was Peggy Slaghoople. So at least
she like jumps out of a one-story building. She's like, come back to the world. All my concepts of who I am have been lies.
Yeah, exactly. I'm Peggy Slaghoople. I didn't know. So I know we've gone over time with you. I really appreciate you coming on, Kim. Thank you so much for coming on tonight. And before I let you go, I just want to give you a chance to give your final thoughts. Anything you want to promote, anything that you feel like you didn't get a chance to talk about, anything you'd like to, well, obviously you want to promote your presidential campaign, anything you want to say, as long as you want. Kim Ruff, the floor is yours.
Okay. Well, I think probably what I would like to say most right now is thank you to you and everyone else who's been gracious enough to invite me onto their podcasts and their radio shows and their webcasts to be able to talk about these things and spend some time with you. It really means a lot. And that's actually a critical aspect of our campaign is getting the word out. You guys are contributing in your own way, shape, and form by allowing me the opportunity to use your show as a platform. So I very much appreciate that. Additionally, one of the things that I say a lot about this campaign is, notwithstanding the fact that we are focused on being anti-war, opening up the marketplace, and of course, criminal justice reform, is the fact that this is really a matter of all hands on deck. I know that it is difficult and frustrating, and there are things that scare you about the world that we live in, and you want to do something about it. And there is absolutely something you can do about it. You can do something whether you work for our campaign or donate. You can do something by getting the word out, having a conversation with your friends and neighbors about these issues and making sure that they understand what's going on is hugely important. Starting your own media company, contributing to somebody else's media company, getting involved with organizations all around. doing things on a local and state level that is a response to and in place of government programs is another way that you can contribute and make our world better. So even if you can't change the world overnight, and we can't, you can absolutely change your world by doing positive actions in your own backyard with your family and your neighbors. So I strongly encourage everybody to do that. And if they're interested in finding out more about our campaign, you can check us out at ruffphillips2020.com. Again, that's ruffphillips2020.com. My name is Kim Ruff, and I am seeking the Libertarian Party nomination for president in 2020.
And I am Spike Cohen, and I endorse that overarching message. And all of her site and everything else is in her Twitter and Facebook is in the show notes. So be sure to check that out, guys. Kim, thank you again so much. Stick around. I'm going to talk to you just briefly before the outro. I really appreciate your patience on all this. Guys, thank you again for joining us right here on My Fellow Americans. By the way, everyone seems, Kim, to think that you're some kind of hybrid between Marge and Lisa. So
that's sweet.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Good. I see that. I totally see that. So, guys, thank you again for tuning in to My Fellow Americans. This has been a great episode. Be sure to tune in tomorrow, Thursday night, for the Writer's Block with Matt Wright. He is interviewing someone amazing. You're not going to believe who it is. It's going to tune in for a surprise guest to me for Matt Wright on the Writer's Block for tomorrow night at probably 8. And then on Friday, Shabbat Shalom, it's Jason Lyon, who is back for Mr. America, the Bearded Truth, finally. And then have a great weekend. And then next Monday, Mr. America, the Bearded Truth for his non-Shabbat, his Monday, his week beginner episode. And then tune in next Tuesday for the Muddy Waters of Freedom, where Matt Wright and I parse through the week's events with the cheerfulness of a young summer boy. And then tune in next Wednesday. But
what the hell is a summer boy?
Just a sweet summer boy. You gotta, if you want to know what it is, you tune in next Tuesday for the Muddy Waters of Freedom, and you too will experience its sweet. Just tune in.
Summer boyishness.
That's not Plan D, by the way. And so next Wednesday is God. Then next Wednesday, if the FCC hasn't somehow taken over the internet just to shut my show down, I will be here for a brand new spanking Summer Boy episode of My Fellow Americans. I'm going to stop saying Summer Boy now. Thank you again for tuning in, and God bless you.
They say about an eye for an eye in a time when the blind lead the blind. Who am I to deny I would cry when a loved one dies? I recognize that body outside, bullet holes in the body that was alive. Now confined with chalk outline. Find out how, but you never know why. It ain't even make it to the news at 9. It ain't even make it to the news at 9. That's my sister, mother, father, brother, son. That's one of mine. All these years I close my eyes, open up to only find I'm in line. There's a pointless murder happening all the time. Either lose your life or mine. Caught up in them versus I. That ain't how it started, nah. How were we supposed to survive? There's a war going on outside. Who would want to raise a child? Whom the tomb is flashing by. Now you have to say goodbye when you watch them on the news.
We will make the